You're not tired because of your day. You're tired because your mind won't stop carrying it. Right when your body finally lies down, your thoughts begin to wake up, replaying conversations, imagining outcomes, holding on to things that already passed. And somehow, the more you try to relax, the heavier everything feels. Why does your mind do this? Why does it keep holding on, even when you just want peace? This video won't force you to sleep, but it might help your mind loosen its grip. Just enough for you to finally rest. Because maybe you've felt this before. The room is quiet. The lights are off. Everything around you is still. But inside, it's not. Your mind moves from one thought to another. A moment from earlier today. Something you said, or wish you didn't say. A worry about tomorrow, plus a quiet pressure you can't even explain. And the strange part is, nothing is actually happening right now. Yet, it feels like something is weighing on you. It almost feels like you're carrying something invisible, something no one else can see, but you feel it all the time. Have you ever noticed that it's not life itself that exhausts you, but the way your mind keeps holding on to it? The past, the future, the expectations, the what-ifs and what should have been. They don't exist in this moment, but your mind keeps them alive, and slowly, they become a kind of weight, not in your hands, but in your chest, in your thoughts, in the space where peace should be. But what if that weight was never something you had to carry? What if the exhaustion you feel is not from life being too heavy, but from holding onto it too tightly? In Buddhist wisdom, there is a quiet understanding. Suffering doesn't come from life itself, but from our attachment to it. Not what happens, but what we refuse to release. And maybe, just maybe, peace was never far away. It was only hidden beneath everything you kept holding on to. In this video, we'll gently explore why the mind holds on and how, little by little, you can begin to let go and feel lighter again. 身体 the invisible burden. We carry, there's something most people never stop to notice. The heaviest things you carry can't be seen. And maybe this connects to what you felt just a moment ago, that quiet weight in your mind, even when everything around you is still. Because the truth is, it's not always your life that feels heavy. It's what your mind is holding on to. At the same time, you go through your day like everyone else. You work, you talk, you respond, you move forward. But somewhere beneath all of that, something stays with you. A conversation that didn't sit right, a mistake you wish you could undo, a memory that still stings when it quietly returns. And at the very same time, there's also something else, a worry about what might happen tomorrow, an expectation you feel you have to meet, at a silent pressure to figure everything out. So without even realizing it, you are carrying two worlds at once, the past and the future, and neither of them are actually here. But your mind doesn't let them go. This is where the tension begins. Not in your body, but in the space between what has already happened and what has not happened yet. Have you ever noticed how exhausting that feels? You're not just living today, you're reliving yesterday, while trying to control tomorrow. And somewhere in between, you slowly lose the ability to rest. From a Buddhist perspective, this is a very quiet kind of suffering. Not loud, not dramatic, but constant. Because the mind keeps reaching backward into memory and forward into imagination. And every time it does, it creates another layer of weight. It's like holding on to something you no longer need, but refusing to put it down. Not because you want to suffer, but because you've grown used to carrying it. And that there's a subtle belief hidden underneath all of this. If I keep thinking about it, I can fix it. If I keep worrying, I can prevent it. But does it really work that way? Or does it only make the mind more tired? Imagine someone lying in bed at night. The room is quiet, their body is still, but their mind is moving endlessly. They replay a moment from earlier, what they said, what they should have said. Then suddenly, their thoughts jump to tomorrow. What if this goes wrong? What if I'm not ready? What if things don't work out? And just like that, the weight becomes heavier. Not because anything new has happened, but because the mind keeps adding more to carry. This is the invisible burden. It doesn't show on the outside, but inside, it slowly drains your energy. And the hardest part is, most people don't even realize they're carrying it. They think they're just tired, or stressed, or overwhelmed by life. But what if it's not life itself? What if it's the constant holding, and the constant replaying, the constant reaching for something that isn't here? In Buddhist wisdom, there is a gentle understanding. The mind suffers, not because of what is present, but because of what it refuses to release. Not the moment itself, but the attachments surrounding it. And once you begin to see this, something shifts. Not dramatically, not all at once, but quietly. You start to notice how often your mind drifts away from now, how often it carries something unnecessary, and for the first time, you begin to question it. Do I really need to hold on to this? Right now? In this moment? Because if you look closely, you might realize something surprising. Most of what you're carrying is not happening anymore, and not happening yet. It only exists because your mind keeps holding it in place, and maybe just noticing that is the beginning of something lighter. And maybe in a quiet moment like this, you can feel it too. That subtle weight in your chest, and that constant movement in your thoughts. Not loud, but always there. And perhaps tonight, without trying to fix anything, you simply begin to see how much you've been carrying all along. 2. Why we hold on so tightly. But here's something even deeper. We don't just carry these invisible weights, we protect them. And if you noticed in the last part, it's not that the mind accidentally holds on. It holds on intentionally, even when it hurts. Because somewhere inside you, there's a quiet belief. If I let this go, I might lose something important. And that belief feels real. You hold on to a relationship, even when it drains you. You hold on to an identity, even when it no longer fits who you are. You hold on to expectations, even when they quietly exhaust you. Not because you don't see the pain, but because letting go feels like something even worse. It feels like losing control. And maybe you felt this in your own life. You try to move on, but something keeps pulling you back. A memory, a person, as a version of yourself you're afraid to outgrow. Even when you know it's no longer right, you hesitate. Because holding on feels familiar, and letting go feels uncertain. From a deeper perspective, this is where attachment begins. Not just attachment to things, but attachment to meaning, to who you think you are, to how you think life should go, to how others should treat you. And when reality doesn't match that, something inside resists. It tightens. It holds on even harder. But here's the quiet truth most people don't realize. You're not holding on to things. You're holding on to the feeling they give you, the sense of identity, the illusion of control, the comfort of the familiar, even if it hurts. It's like holding on to a rope that's burning your hands, but refusing to let go because you're afraid of what happens next. Have you ever asked yourself, why do I keep holding on to something that clearly causes me pain? Is it really about the thing itself? Or is it about what I believe I'll lose without it? There's a quiet story many people carry. Someone spends years chasing approval, trying to be enough, trying to meet expectations that were never truly theirs. And one day, they pause, not because everything is solved, but because they're too tired to keep holding on. They sit in silence, maybe in a dimly lit room, just like before. And for the first time, they don't reach for the next thought. They don't replay the past. They don't try to control what comes next. They simply sit there with everything they've been carrying. And in that stillness, something begins to feel different. Not lighter yet, but softer, because they realize something important. They were never holding on to life itself. They were holding on to an idea of how life should be, and that idea was never stable to begin with. In Buddhist wisdom, attachment is not seen as something wrong, but something deeply human. The mind clings because it seeks safety. It wants something solid, something predictable. But life doesn't move that way. Everything changes, everything shifts, and when we try to hold on to something that is constantly changing, we create tension within ourselves. Not because we are weak, but because we are resisting the natural flow of things. So the question becomes, what are you still holding on to? That is quietly holding on to you. Is it a version of the past that no longer exists? A future that hasn't arrived? Or a sense of control that was never truly in your hands? Because sometimes, the reason something feels so heavy is not because it's too much, but because you're gripping it too tightly. And maybe letting go doesn't mean losing it forever. Maybe it simply means allowing it to be what it is, without needing it to stay, without needing it to define you, without needing it to go your way. And in that space, something unexpected begins to appear. Not emptiness, but freedom. A quiet kind of freedom that doesn't come from controlling life, but from no longer trying to. And as that understanding slowly settles in, you may begin to feel something shift inside. Not all at once, but gently, like a hand that has been clenched for too long, finally beginning to open. And in that opening, there is less resistance, less tension, less weight. And maybe that is where letting go truly begins. 3. The illusion of control. But there is something even more subtle, something hidden beneath everything you've been holding on to. It's not just attachment. It's the feeling that if you hold on tightly enough, you can control what happens next. And maybe you've already felt this in your own mind. That quiet urge to figure everything out, to prepare, to predict, to make sure things don't fall apart. Because in some way, holding on feels like safety. It feels like if you keep thinking about it, you'll stay one step ahead of life. But if you look closely, does it really work that way? Or does it only make your mind more restless? You try to control how people see you. You replay conversations, adjusting what you should have said. You try to control outcomes. You imagine different scenarios, hoping one of them will prepare you enough. You try to control the future, as if thinking harder will somehow make it clearer. And yet, the more you try to control everything, the less peaceful you feel. Because life doesn't move based on your thoughts. It moves on its own, unpredictable, changing, uncertain. And this is where the illusion begins. You believe that holding on gives you control. But in reality, it creates resistance. Resistance to what is already happening. Resistance to what you cannot change. Resistance to the natural flow of life itself. From a Buddhist perspective, this is a very gentle truth. Everything is impermanent. Every moment changes. Every feeling shifts. Every situation evolves. Nothing stays the same long enough to be controlled. But the mind struggles to accept this because uncertainty feels uncomfortable. So instead of allowing life to move, the mind tightens its grip. It tries to freeze things, to hold moments in place, to keep what feels good, and avoid what feels uncertain. But Can anything truly stay still? Imagine holding water in your hands. The tighter you squeeze, the faster it slips through your fingers. And yet, if you soften your hands, it stays, just for a moment. Naturally, life moves the same way. There was once someone who spent years trying to control everything. Their career, their relationships, their future. Every decision had to be perfect. Every outcome had to be planned. At first, it seemed like strength, but over time, it became exhausting. Because no matter how much they planned, life kept surprising them. Things didn't go as expected. People changed. Opportunities came and went, and each time something shifted, they felt tension. Not because life was wrong, but because it didn't match their expectations. One evening, they sat alone, in the same quiet room, the same stillness. But something inside felt different. They were too tired to control everything anymore, too tired to hold on so tightly. So for the first time, they stopped trying to fix what hadn't even happened yet. They let their thoughts pass, without chasing them. And in that small moment, something unexpected appeared. Not certainty, but space. A quiet space where nothing needed to be controlled. And in that space, there was less fear. Because they began to see something clearly, the problem was never uncertainty. The problem was the resistance to it. Have you ever wondered, what if the peace you're looking for is not found in controlling life, but in allowing it? What if letting go is not losing control, but seeing that control was never truly there? Because when you stop trying to hold everything in place, something softens inside you. You stop fighting the moment. You stop exhausting yourself with what ifs. And slowly, you begin to move with life instead of against it. This doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop forcing. You still act. You still live. And you still choose, but without that tight grip, that constant pressure to make everything certain. And in that shift, life begins to feel lighter. Not because it becomes predictable, but because you no longer need it to be. And maybe the control you were searching for was never about holding on, but about trusting that you don't have to. And in a quiet moment like this, you might notice your mind still trying to reach, still trying to solve, still trying to make things certain. But what if, just for a moment, you didn't follow it? What if you let everything be exactly as it is and simply rested in the space where nothing needs to be controlled, even if only for now? 4. Suffering begins with attachment. But there is a moment, so quiet that most people miss it completely. It's the moment when reality doesn't match what you expected. And if you look back at what we just explored, how the mind tries to control, to hold, to predict, you may begin to see something deeper. It's not just that life is uncertain. It's that the mind quietly creates a version of how life should be. And then, it holds on to that version. You expect things to go a certain way. You expect people to act a certain way. You expect yourself to be a certain kind of person. And when those expectations aren't met, something inside you reacts. A subtle tension, a quiet disappointment. Sometimes, even pain you can't fully explain. Have you ever noticed this? Two people can experience the same situation, but feel completely different about it. One feels frustrated, the other feels at peace. What makes the difference? Not the event itself, but the expectation behind it. Because suffering doesn't come from what happens. It comes from the gap between what happens and what you believe should happen. And that gap is where the wait begins. You expect a relationship to last, but it changes. You expect someone to understand you, but they don't. You expect yourself to succeed by a certain time, but life moves differently. And in each of these moments, It's not just the situation that hurts, it's the silent sentence in your mind. This isn't how it was supposed to be. From a Buddhist perspective, this is the root of a very human kind of suffering. Not because expectations are wrong, but because we become attached to them. We don't just prefer things to go a certain way, we need them to. And when life doesn't follow that script, we resist, we tighten, we hold on, we argue with reality. But can reality ever lose that argument? Or is it always the mind that becomes exhausted? There was someone who spent years building a vision for their life, a clear path, a clear timeline, a clear idea of how everything should unfold. And for a while, it seemed to be working. Until one day, it didn't. Plans changed. Unexpected things happened. People they trusted walked away. And suddenly, everything they believed life should be no longer existed. At first, they felt lost. Not just because things changed, but because the version of life they were holding on to was gone. And without it, they didn't know how to feel at peace. So they resisted. They replayed what went wrong. They questioned everything. They tried to rebuild the same expectation over and over again. But each time, it brought more frustration, more exhaustion, until one evening, in that same quiet space we've been returning to, they stopped. Not because they had answers, but because they no longer had the energy to fight reality. They sat there, with everything exactly as it was. No fixing, no controlling, no rewriting the story. Just this moment. And slowly, something began to shift. They realized something simple, but profound. Life was not painful because it changed. Life felt painful because they were holding on to how it was supposed to stay. And in that realization, there was a small release. Not complete peace, but less resistance. Have you ever asked yourself, how much of your pain comes not from what is happening, but from what you wish were happening instead? How often do we suffer? Not because life is wrong, but because it doesn't match the image in our mind. Because the truth is, life doesn't follow our expectations. It moves in its own way. And the more tightly we hold on to should, the more tension we create within ourselves. But what if, instead of asking life to be different, we allowed it to be what it is, not as resignation and not as giving up, but as a quiet acceptance? That releases the need to control the outcome. In Buddhist wisdom, this is where suffering begins to dissolve. Not when life becomes perfect, but when attachment softens. When this shouldn't be happening turns into this is what is happening. And in that shift, there is space. Space to breathe, space to feel, space to rest in the moment without resistance. And maybe the peace you've been searching for was never on the other side of perfect circumstances. It was hidden behind the expectations you've been holding on to. And when those expectations begin to loosen, even slightly, something inside you becomes lighter, not because everything is resolved, but because you are no longer fighting what is. And from that place, a different kind of understanding begins to emerge, one that doesn't depend on life going your way, but on your ability to meet life as it is. And that is where true peace quietly begins. 5. The cost of not letting go. But there is a quiet cost, one that most people don't notice until they are already exhausted, because holding on doesn't just stay in your thoughts. It slowly begins to affect everything. And if you reflect on what we just uncovered, how attachment creates resistance, how expectations create tension, then this next part becomes clearer. That weight you feel doesn't disappear when you ignore it. it builds. Little by little, you wake up already tired, even before the day begins, not because your body didn't rest, but because your mind never truly stopped. There's always something running in the background, a thought, a concern, a quiet pressure you can't fully name. And throughout the day, it follows you. At work, you try to focus, but part of your mind is somewhere else. In conversations, you listen, but you're also thinking about what's next, what might go wrong, what still hasn't been resolved. Even in moments that are supposed to feel light, there's a subtle heaviness underneath. And over time, this becomes your normal. You get used to carrying tension, used to overthinking, used to feeling slightly overwhelmed, even when nothing urgent is happening. But have you ever paused and asked yourself, what is this really doing to me? Because the cost of holding on is not just mental. It begins to show up in your body, tightness in your chest, a constant sense of unease, a feeling like you can never fully relax. Your shoulders stay tense, as if you're always bracing for something. Your breathing becomes shallow, as if your body is waiting for a moment that hasn't arrived yet. And the longer this continues, the more disconnected you feel from peace. Not because peace is gone, but because your system is constantly occupied. Occupied with thoughts, occupied with control, occupied with everything you haven't released. There was someone who lived like this for years, always thinking, always planning, always holding on to something. From the outside, they seemed fine, responsible, focused, in control. But inside, they were tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, a deeper kind, the kind that comes from never putting anything down. One evening, they sat alone again, same quiet room, same stillness. But this time, they noticed something different. It wasn't just their thoughts that were tired. Their whole being felt heavy, as if they had been carrying something for too long, without even realizing it. So they asked themselves a simple question. What would happen if I stopped holding on just for a moment? Not forever, not completely, just for now. And in that small experiment, they allowed one thought to pass without following it, then another and another. And something surprising began to happen. Nothing fell apart. Nothing urgent appeared. The world didn't collapse. Instead, there was a small sense of relief, like setting down a bag you didn't realize was so heavy. And in that moment, they understood something deeply. The weight was never coming from life itself. It was coming from the constant holding, from the refusal to release. Have you ever noticed how heavy something feels only when you refuse to put it down? Because the truth is, life doesn't become overwhelming all at once. It becomes overwhelming when nothing is allowed to leave your mind. When every thought is kept, every worry is carried, every expectation is held tightly. And over time, this creates emotional exhaustion. Not dramatic, not sudden, but steady. Like a quiet drain that never stops. From a Buddhist perspective, this is not something to judge. It's something to understand. The mind clings because it doesn't know another way. But once you begin to see the cost clearly, something inside you starts to question it. Is it worth carrying all of this every day? Is it necessary to hold on to every thought, every outcome, every version of the past? Or is there another way to live, one that feels lighter, even if nothing outside changes? Because maybe the reason life feels so heavy is not because there is too much in it, but because there is too much you are refusing to release. And once you begin to see that, you also begin to sense something else, a possibility that if holding on creates this much weight, then letting go, even a little, might create space. And in that space, there might be something you haven't felt in a long time. Not control, not certainty, but ease. A quiet ease. That doesn't come from fixing everything, but from no longer carrying everything at once. And maybe this is where the shift begins, not in changing your life, but in changing what you choose to hold and what you are finally willing to set down. 6. Letting go is not losing. But here's the part that many people misunderstand, and it quietly keeps them stuck. They believe that letting go means losing something. And if you've been following this journey, seeing how the mind holds on, how it tries to control, how it suffers when reality doesn't match, then this belief becomes the final barrier. Because even when you begin to see the weight, you still hesitate. You hesitate to release it, not because you don't want peace, but because letting go feels like giving up. It feels like you're surrendering something important, a relationship, a dream, a version of yourself. And that fear is very real. You think, if I let this go, does it mean it didn't matter? If I stop holding on, does it mean I failed? If I accept things as they are, am I just settling? So instead of letting go, you hold on tighter, even when it hurts. But what if letting go was never about losing anything? What if it was about freeing yourself from the way you're holding it? Because there is a difference between caring and clinging, between loving and needing something to stay exactly as it is, between remembering and reliving. From a Buddhist perspective, letting go is not rejection. It's not turning away from life. It's turning toward it without resistance. It's allowing things to exist without trying to control how long they stay. Imagine holding sand in your hand. If you grip it tightly, it slips away faster. But if your hand is open, it rests there naturally. You don't lose it by softening your grip. You simply stop forcing it to stay. Life works in the same way. There was someone who struggled with this deeply. They believed that holding on meant strength, that if they just tried harder, if they didn't give up, things would eventually go back to how they were. So they held on to a relationship that was no longer the same. They replayed memories. They held on to expectations. They resisted what was changing. And the more they held on, the more painful it became. Not because love was wrong, but because the way they were holding it left no space for it to breathe. One night, sitting quietly again, they asked themselves something simple. What am I actually holding on to right now? And the answer surprised them. It wasn't the person. It wasn't even the relationship. It was the idea of how it used to feel. And in that realization, something softened. They didn't stop caring. They didn't erase the memories, but they stopped trying to make it stay the same. And in that moment, the pain began to loosen. Because letting go didn't take anything away from them. It gave something back: space, breath, freedom from the constant tension of trying to hold life still. Have you ever noticed how exhausting it is to hold something in place that is already changing? How heavy it feels to resist what is already happening? Because the truth is, letting go is not about losing what matters. It's about releasing the struggle around what you cannot control. It's choosing peace over the need to force things to stay. It's allowing life to move without gripping every moment. And in that choice, something very gentle begins to appear. A different kind of strength. Not the strength of holding on, but the strength of allowing. Of trusting that you can still be okay, even when things change. And this doesn't happen all at once. It happens slowly, moment by moment, thought by thought. You notice something you're holding on to, and instead of tightening, you soften, just a little. And that small shift creates space. And in that space, there is less resistance, less tension, less weight, and maybe the thing you were afraid to lose. Was never meant to stay the same anyway. Maybe what you're really gaining is the ability to experience life without constantly fighting it. And maybe, in a quiet moment like this, you're still holding on to something, a thought, a memory, a feeling you're not ready to release. And that's okay. You don't have to let go of everything, but perhaps tonight, you don't have to hold it so tightly either, just enough to feel what it might be like to be free from it, even for a moment. 7. The practice of awareness. But there is something most people skip. Even after they understand everything we've just explored, they try to let go without first learning how to see. And this is where the real shift begins. Because if you remember that quiet moment, when you noticed the weight, when you realized how tightly you've been holding on, there is one simple truth underneath it all. You cannot let go of what you are not aware of. Most of the time, the mind moves so quickly that you don't even notice what you're holding. A thought appears, and you follow it. A memory surfaces, and you relive it. A worry arises, and you believe it. All of this happens automatically, without pause, without space, and before you realize it, you're already caught inside the loop again. Overthinking, replaying, holding on. Have you ever noticed how fast this happens? One moment you're fine, and the next, your mind is somewhere else entirely. Not here, not now, but somewhere in the past, or somewhere in the future. And the more it moves like this, the harder it becomes to let anything go, because you can't release something you haven't even seen clearly. This is why awareness matters, not as a technique, not as something complicated, but as a gentle way of seeing. From a Buddhist perspective, awareness is not about stopping your thoughts, it's about noticing them without becoming them. There is a difference, a very quiet but powerful difference. Imagine sitting in that same quiet room again. Nothing has changed around you. But this time, instead of following every thought, you simply watch. A thought appears. Instead of chasing it, you notice it. It passes. Another thought comes. Instead of judging it, you allow it. And slowly, something begins to shift. Not because the thoughts disappear, but because your relationship with them changes. There was someone who struggled with this deeply. Their mind was always busy, always thinking, always holding on to something. They believed that peace meant stopping their thoughts completely, so they tried. They forced their mind to be quiet. They resisted every thought that appeared, but the more they resisted, the louder everything became, until one day, they were too tired to fight anymore. So, instead of trying to control their mind, they did something different. They sat down and simply observed. No forcing, no fixing, just watching. At first, it felt strange. Thoughts kept coming, memories, worries, random images. But this time, they didn't follow. They didn't push anything away either. They just noticed. And after a while, something unexpected happened. The thoughts began to slow down, not because they were controlled, but because they were no longer being fed. And in that space, there was a sense of calm. Not perfect stillness, but enough quiet to breathe. Have you ever asked yourself, what would happen if you didn't follow every thought your mind creates? What if you could just see them, like clouds passing in the sky? Because the truth is, thoughts are not the problem. Attachment to them is. And awareness is what loosens that attachment. It creates space, space between you and what your mind is doing. And in that space, you begin to have a choice, to follow or to let go, to hold on or to soften. And this doesn't require effort in the way you might think. It doesn't require you to become someone different. It only asks for one small shift, to notice, to pause, just long enough to see what is happening inside you. And the more you practice this, the more natural it becomes. You begin to catch your thoughts earlier, before they pull you too far, before they become something heavy. And slowly, the weight starts to lift. Not because life has changed, but because you are no longer unconsciously carrying everything. And maybe peace was never something you had to create. Maybe it was already there, hidden beneath the constant movement of your mind. And awareness is simply the act of uncovering it, one quiet moment at a time. And as you sit here now, you might notice a thought forming or fading. You might notice your breath moving gently. No need to change anything. Just notice, because in that simple awareness, something begins to loosen. And that is where letting go quietly begins. 8. Releasing the past. But there is one place the mind returns to, again and again, even when nothing there can be changed. The past. And if you've been noticing your thoughts more closely, as we explored in the last part, you may have already seen this pattern, how easily the mind drifts backward to something you said, something you lost, something you wish had gone differently. And somehow, even though it's over, it still feels alive inside you. You replay it, not once, but many times, each time hoping, in some quiet way, that something might feel different. That maybe, if you think about it enough, you'll find peace in it. But does it ever really bring peace? Or does it only reopen what was already closed? Because the truth is, the past does not exist anymore. Not in reality, only in the mind. And yet the more you revisit it, the more real it begins to feel. Have you ever noticed how one memory can change your entire mood? You could be sitting quietly, with nothing wrong in this moment, and then suddenly, a thought appears, a moment from years ago, and just like that, your body reacts, your chest tightens, your mind fills with emotion. You feel something, as if it's happening now, but it isn't. It's only a memory, and yet, your mind treats it as if it's still present. This is where suffering quietly continues, not because the past is still happening, but because it is still being held. From a Buddhist perspective, this is a very gentle understanding. The past only has power when we keep bringing it into the present, not intentionally, but through repetition, through replaying, through revisiting, through holding on to what has already ended. There was someone who carried a moment from their past for years, a single mistake, something they said, and that they couldn't take back. And no matter how much time passed, it stayed with them. They replayed it at night. They questioned themselves. They imagined how things could have been different. And each time, they felt the same weight, the same regret, the same quiet pain. One evening, they found themselves doing it again. Same memory, same loop. But this time, something shifted. Instead of going deeper into the story, they paused. They noticed the thought. Not the content, but the fact that it was just a thought. And for the first time, they didn't follow it. They didn't fix it. They didn't judge it. They simply let it be there. And then let it pass. And in that small moment, something unexpected happened. The pain didn't disappear completely, but it didn't grow either. It stayed and then softened because they were no longer feeding it. And in that space, they realized something quietly powerful. They had been reliving the same moment, and not because it was still happening, but because they kept returning to it. Have you ever asked yourself, How many times have I lived the same past inside my mind? How many times have I carried something that is no longer here? Because the truth is, letting go of the past doesn't mean forgetting it. It doesn't mean pretending it didn't matter. It means allowing it to stay where it belongs. Behind you, not erased, but no longer active in your present moment. Because every time you stop replaying it, you give yourself a little more space, a little more freedom, a little more distance from the weight. And slowly, that weight begins to fade, not because the past changes, but because your relationship with it does. You stop carrying it forward. You stop turning it into something that continues to hurt you. And instead, you let it rest, where it has always been, in the past. And maybe you don't have to let go of everything all at once. Maybe there is just one memory, one moment, that you've been holding on to, not because you want to, but because you didn't know how to release it. And what if, right now, you didn't push it away, but also didn't hold on to it either? Just let it be there, and then, gently, let it move, like a cloud passing through the sky. Because the mind may return to the past, but you don't have to stay there. You can notice it and come back, again and again, to this moment, where nothing from the past is actually happening anymore. And in that return, there is something very quiet, but very real. Relief, a soft release from something you've been carrying for far too long. And as that release deepens, you begin to understand something gently. You don't heal by holding on to the past. You heal by no longer reliving it. And that is where the past finally begins to loosen its hold on you. 9. Letting go of expectations. But there is another layer, even quieter than the past, that shapes how you feel every single day. It's not what already happened. It's what you expect to happen. And if you look closely at what we just explored, how the past lives in the mind through replay, you may begin to notice something else. The future lives in the mind through expectation. Not always clearly, not always consciously, but it's there. You expect people to understand you without having to explain. You expect things to go a certain way because you've planned for it. You expect yourself to be further along, to be better, to be different. And when those expectations aren't met, something inside you tightens, not loudly, but quietly. A small disappointment, a subtle frustration, a feeling that something isn't quite right, even when nothing is actually wrong in this moment. Have you ever felt that? Everything looks fine on the outside, but inside, there's a quiet tension you can't explain, because somewhere in your mind, life is not matching the version you created. And that gap between what is and what you believe should be is where pressure begins, not just toward yourself, but toward others too. You expect someone to act a certain way, and when they don't, it hurts. You expect a relationship to feel a certain way, and when it shifts, you resist. You expect life to unfold according to your timeline, and when it doesn't, you feel behind. But here is the subtle truth. Expectations are rarely spoken, but they are deeply felt. And because they are often unspoken, they create silent pressure. Pressure on yourself to be more, pressure on others to meet something they don't even see. And slowly, this pressure becomes weight. Now, not because anyone is doing something wrong, but because the mind is holding on to something invisible. From a Buddhist perspective, this is another form of attachment, not to the past, but to imagined outcomes, to how things should unfold. And when reality moves differently, we suffer. There was someone who carried this quietly for years. They had a vision for their life, how their career would grow, how their relationships would feel, how everything would come together. And for a while, they believed they were on track. But over time, things didn't align the way they expected. People changed. Opportunities shifted. Life moved in ways they didn't plan. And even though nothing was truly wrong, they felt constant dissatisfaction, a quiet feeling that something was missing. One evening, sitting in that same familiar silence, they asked themselves a different kind of question. What exactly am I expecting right now that reality is not giving me? And the answer came slowly. They weren't just living their life, they were comparing it to an internal script, a version of life that only existed in their mind. And because reality didn't match it, they felt tension. But what if the tension wasn't coming from life? What if it was coming from the expectation itself? Have you ever noticed how freeing it feels when you stop expecting someone to act a certain way? When you allow them to be exactly who they are? There is less resistance, less disappointment, less pressure. Not because everything becomes perfect, but because you are no longer holding on to a fixed outcome. The same is true with yourself. When you stop expecting yourself to be somewhere you're not yet, there is space to grow without judgment, space to exist without constant pressure. Because expectations often sound like motivation, but feel like weight. They tell you who you should be, how things should go, what life should look like. But life doesn't follow those rules. It moves in its own rhythm. And the more tightly you hold on to expectations, the more you miss what is actually here. But when you begin to loosen them, something changes. You start to experience life instead of comparing it. You start to see people instead of projecting onto them. You start to feel moments without measuring them against an ideal. And in that shift, there is a quiet kind of freedom. Not because life becomes easier, but because you are no longer creating extra pressure on top of what already is. And maybe you don't need to remove all expectations at once. Maybe there is just one quiet should at that you've been holding on to. And what if, just for a moment, you let it go? Not forever, just long enough to see what remains without it. Because what remains is often something very simple. This moment, unfiltered, unforced, enough as it is. And in a quiet moment like this, yet you might notice the pressure easing, just a little. The need for things to be different, softening. No fixing, no chasing, just being here without asking life to change. And perhaps that is where a deeper kind of freedom begins. 10. Finding peace in the present moment. But there is one place, so simple that the mind almost overlooks it completely. And yet, it is the only place where peace has ever existed. Right here, right now. And if you've been following this journey, seeing how the mind drifts into the past, how it reaches into the future, how it carries expectations and control, then this realization begins to feel almost surprising. Peace was never in those places. Not in what already happened, not in what hasn't happened yet. Only here, in this moment. But the mind rarely stays here. It moves, constantly. One thought leads to another. One memory pulls you backward. One worry pushes you forward. And before you realize it, you've left the present again. Not physically, but mentally. Have you ever noticed how rare it is to be fully here? And not thinking about something else, not planning, not replaying, just here, breathing, aware, without needing anything to be different. Because in that state, there is a kind of quiet, a kind of stillness that doesn't depend on anything external. From a Buddhist perspective, this is where peace naturally arises. Not because you created it, but because you stopped leaving it. There was someone who spent years searching for peace. They thought it would come when their life was more stable, when their problems were solved, when everything finally made sense. So they kept moving forward, chasing a moment that always seemed just ahead. But no matter how much they achieved, how much they improved, how much they tried to fix, peace never stayed. It came briefly and then disappeared again. One day, sitting quietly, with nothing left to chase, they noticed something small, their breath, just moving in and out. Nothing special, nothing dramatic, but for a moment, they stayed with it. No thinking, no analyzing, just feeling the breath as it was. And in that moment, something shifted, not in their life, but in their experience. There was no past, no future, no expectation, just this. And within that, there was a quiet sense of ease, not because everything was perfect, but because nothing was being resisted. Have you ever asked yourself, when was the last time you were fully present, without your mind pulling you somewhere else? Because the truth is, the present moment is always available, but it is often covered by the movement of the mind. And when the mind slows down, even slightly, that presence begins to reveal itself. You don't have to force it. You don't have to create it. You only need to return, again and again, to something simple: your breath, the feeling of your body, the quiet around you. And each time you return, the mind becomes a little lighter, because it is no longer carrying what doesn't belong to this moment. No past, no future, just now. And in that simplicity, there is peace. Not a dramatic kind of peace, but a quiet one, a steady one, the kind that doesn't come and go, but is always there when you stop leaving it. This doesn't mean your thoughts disappear. They still come, but you don't have to follow them. You can notice and gently come back to this breath, to this moment, to this space where nothing is missing. And slowly, this becomes a practice, not something you do perfectly, but something you return to whenever you remember. And over time, something changes. You spend less time lost in thought, less time carrying unnecessary weight, and more time just being. And maybe peace was never something far away. Maybe it was always here, waiting quietly, beneath everything else. And all it asks is that you come back. Even now, you might notice your breath again, soft, steady, nothing to fix, nothing to chase, at just this moment as it is. And in that, there is already enough. And from this place, a different way of living begins to unfold. 11. The lightness of being. And then, something begins to change. Not suddenly, not all at once, but quietly. Almost like a weight you didn't realize you were carrying is no longer there. And if you followed this journey, from noticing the burden, to understanding attachment, to releasing the past, to softening expectations, to returning to the present, then this moment feels different. Not because life has become perfect, but because something inside you is no longer resisting it. At first, it's subtle. You wake up, and your mind feels a little less crowded. The same thoughts may still appear, but they don't stay as long. They pass more easily, and for the first time in a long time, there is space between them. Have you ever experienced that? That small gap, where nothing is pulling at you? No past replaying, and no future pressing. Just a quiet moment, where your mind is simply still. That is the beginning of lightness. Not excitement, not intensity, but ease. A gentle ease that doesn't demand anything from the moment. Throughout your day, you start to notice it more. Situations that used to trigger tension feel different now, not because they've changed, but because you're no longer holding on to them the same way. Someone says something unexpected, and instead of replaying it, you let it pass. Plans shift, and instead of resisting, you adjust. Things don't go as imagined, and instead of tightening, you soften. And in each of these moments, you save yourself from unnecessary weight because you're no longer adding resistance to what is already happening. There was someone who once believed that peace meant having everything under control. They thought that if life finally aligned, if everything went their way, then they would feel calm. But over time, they realized something surprising. The more they tried to control life, the heavier it felt. The more they chased clarity, the more confused they became, until one day, they stopped trying to force everything into place. They allowed uncertainty. They allowed change. They allowed things to be unfinished. And in that allowing, something opened. Not externally, but internally. They felt lighter, not because their problems disappeared, but because they stopped carrying them everywhere. They stopped turning every moment into something that needed to be fixed. And instead, they began to live simply, naturally. Have you ever wondered what your life would feel like if you didn't carry every thought, every expectation, every worry into every moment? Because when you let go, you don't lose your life. You begin to experience it more fully. Colors feel softer. Moments feel clearer. Even silence feels different. There is a sense of presence that wasn't there before. Not forced, not created, just revealed. From a Buddhist perspective, this is not something extraordinary. It's something very natural. When the mind is no longer clinging, it returns to its original state. Calm, open, unburdened. Like water, when it is no longer disturbed, clear by itself. And in that clarity, there is freedom. Not the freedom of having everything you want, but the freedom of not needing everything to be a certain way. And that kind of freedom is deeply peaceful. It doesn't depend on circumstances. It doesn't disappear when things change. Because it comes from within, from the absence of resistance, from the release of unnecessary weight. And maybe life was never meant to feel like something you had to carry. Maybe it was meant to flow, to move, to change. And when you stop trying to hold it in place, you begin to move with it. Not perfectly, but peacefully. And in that movement, there is a quiet joy, and not loud, not overwhelming, but steady. A feeling that even if things are uncertain, you are okay. Even if things are incomplete, you are enough. And maybe this is what you've been searching for all along. Not a perfect life, but a lighter way of living. One where you no longer carry what was never yours to hold. And as you sit here now, you might notice something small, a little more space in your thoughts, a little more ease in your body. Nothing dramatic, just lighter. And perhaps this lightness has always been within you, waiting quietly for you to let go. 12. Living with an open hand. But in the end, everything we've explored comes down to something very simple. Not something you need to achieve, not something you need to become, but something you gently learn to stop doing, holding on so tightly. And if you look back at this journey, the weight you've been carrying, the attachment, the need for control, the expectations, the past, the constant movement of the mind, you may begin to see a pattern. It was never life that made things so heavy. It was the way you were holding it, clenched, tight, unwilling to release, as if everything had to stay exactly as it was. But life doesn't move that way. It never has. And maybe it never will. There is a simple image that captures all of this. Imagine holding your hand out in front of you. Now, slowly, close it into a fist. Now feel the tension in your fingers, in your palm, in your arm. The tighter you hold, the more effort it takes, the more energy it drains. And yet, nothing inside your hand actually becomes more secure. Now, slowly open it. Let your fingers relax. Let your hand soften. Notice what happens. The tension fades. The effort disappears. And what you hold rests there naturally, without force, without strain. Life is the same. When you hold it with a closed fist, trying to control, to keep, to resist, everything feels heavier, more fragile, more exhausting, because you are constantly fighting against what is already changing. But when you hold life with an open hand, something shifts. You still care, you still experience, you still live fully. But without that constant tension, without that need to make everything stay. There was someone who slowly began to understand this. After years of holding on to outcomes, to people, to expectations, they didn't suddenly change their life. They didn't walk away from everything. They simply changed how they held it. When a thought came, they didn't grip it so tightly. When a moment passed, they didn't chase it. When something changed, they allowed it. At first, it felt unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable, because the mind was used to holding on, used to controlling, used to tightening. But over time, something softened, not dramatically, but gently. They began to feel less overwhelmed, less reactive, less pulled in every direction, because they were no longer trying to hold everything at once. Have you ever asked yourself, what would your life feel like if you didn't hold on to every moment so tightly? If you allowed things to come and go without needing to keep them? Because the truth is, nothing you hold on to can stay forever, and nothing you release is truly lost. It simply changes form, moves, becomes something else. And when you begin to trust that, holding on becomes less necessary. Not because you stop caring, but because you understand that life is not something you can keep. It's something you experience, moment by moment, breath by breath. And maybe this is the quiet practice you carry with you from here, not forcing yourself to let go of everything, but noticing when your hand begins to close, when your mind begins to grip, and in that moment, softening, just a little, again and again, until it becomes natural, until openness feels easier than holding, until letting go is no longer something you try to do, but something that simply happens. And maybe you don't need to change your whole life tonight. Maybe all you need is this small awareness, this gentle shift, from holding to allowing, from gripping to opening. And perhaps tonight, as you lie there in the quiet, you can feel it. The difference between tension and softness, between holding and letting be. No need to force anything. No need to rush. Just a quiet invitation to open your hand just a little more and see what it feels like to finally stop holding everything. Core message of the video. Maybe after everything we've explored together, you're beginning to see something differently, that the weight you've been feeling was never really coming from life itself. It was coming from what you were holding on to, the thoughts that kept repeating, the expectations that never settled, the past that quietly followed you, and the future that never stopped asking for your attention. And through all of this, you were still here, trying to find peace somewhere ahead. But maybe peace was never ahead of you. Maybe it was always here, waiting beneath everything you were carrying. There is a quiet wisdom in this, not something to force, not something to achieve, just something to notice, that nothing outside of you needs to change, for your mind to begin to soften. Because the moment you stop clinging, even just a little, something shifts, not in your circumstances, but in how you experience them. From a Buddhist perspective, letting go is not a single decision. It is a gentle, ongoing practice, a quiet returning, again and again, to this moment, to this breath, to this awareness that you don't have to carry everything. And maybe tonight, when the world becomes still again, when your mind begins to move as it always does, you won't try to stop it. You won't try to control it. You will simply notice. And perhaps you will choose to release just one thing, one thought, that doesn't need to be followed, one worry, that doesn't need to be solved right now, one expectation that can gently soften. And in that small act, you may feel something open, a little more space, a little more ease, not because everything is resolved, but because you are no longer holding it all. And maybe that is how peace begins. Quietly, gently, a one moment of letting go at a time. If these reflections resonated with you, you might take a moment to pause and notice what you're still holding on to right now. And if you feel ready, you're welcome to share your thoughts in the comments or continue this journey with us on Buddha's Teachings Audio. There are many more quiet insights waiting for you. And truly, thank you for being here, for taking this time to slow down, to listen, and to return to yourself. May your mind be lighter tonight, and your rest a little more peaceful.